The autumn term at Hogwarts always began the same way. A chill in the air, a new set of faces at the tables, and the sound of owls wheeling above the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall. But that year, something felt different. The torches burned lower than usual, and the shadows in the corridors seemed to linger longer than they should. In the Ravenclaw common room, third-year student Maren Vale sat by the window, her quill unmoving above a blank parchment. Outside, rain tapped against the glass like impatient fingers. She had been staring at the Forbidden Forest for the last hour, her mind replaying what she had heard in whispers all week. That a boy from her year, Corvin Ashcroft, hadn't returned after the summer. No one knew what happened. His bed had been cleared, his things gone. His name was missing from the dorm roster. Professors avoided questions about him. The older students said it wasn't the first time someone had vanished quietly from Hogwarts, but the others always returned. Or at least, the school pretended they had. That night, Maren found herself walking the corridor outside the Old Charms classroom. It was past curfew, the halls silent except for the echo of her shoes against stone. She didn't know why she was there, only that she felt drawn to the sound of something faint, a whisper that wasn't quite a voice. It came from behind the wooden door at the end of the passage, the one marked as under repair. The door was locked, but when she touched it, the wood felt warm beneath her palm, almost pulsing. Then the whisper stopped. She leaned closer, pressing her ear against it. For a moment there was only silence. Then softly a voice spoke, quiet, cracked, barely human. "Maren, you can hear me." She stumbled back, heart pounding. It had said her name. The next morning, she tried to convince herself it had been a dream. But at breakfast, she noticed something chilling. The seat across from her, the one that used to belong to Corvin, had a single sheet of parchment lying on the plate. No name, no handwriting, just one line written in fresh ink. "The door remembers you." She showed it to no one. By evening, the parchment had turned blank. Days passed. Classes resumed. But Maren couldn't stop thinking about that door. Whenever she passed near the corridor, she felt it, the same strange pull in her chest, like being watched by the castle itself. One night, unable to sleep, she slipped from the dormitory again. The corridors were cold and silent, the portraits along the walls pretending to slumber. She carried her wand, whispering Lumos, and the faint light revealed something new on the stone floor ahead, footprints. Wet, bare footprints leading toward the same locked classroom. Her breath hitched. They stopped at the door. This time, when she touched it, the wood was cold. She whispered, "Alohomora," but the lock didn't yield. Her pulse raced. She pressed her ear against it again. For a few seconds, nothing. Only the thrum of her heartbeat. Then faintly a scraping sound, like someone dragging nails along the inside. Then a whisper. "Maren, help me. Please." Her light flickered. The air turned heavy, dense with the smell of damp earth. She stepped back. Something moved behind the door, a shadow darker than darkness itself, shifting against the cracks. She ran. By morning, she tried again to convince herself it had been her imagination. Yet when she returned to the Ravenclaw table at breakfast, her friends were whispering. Another student was gone, a first-year boy named Edwin Tull. His dorm bed was empty, his belongings untouched, his name missing from the roll call. That evening, Professor Flitwick addressed the house. His voice trembled slightly as he told them all to stay in groups, to avoid wandering the corridors alone. "The castle is old," he said carefully, "and there are places even the headmistress doesn't understand." Maren sat still, the blood draining from her face. She knew. The same corridor. The same door. That night, she couldn't stop hearing the voice. Whispering through the rain. Through her dreams. Through the walls. When she woke before dawn, there was parchment on her nightstand again. This time, written in a jagged hand she didn't recognize. "You heard me once. Don't make me call again." She stared at it until sunrise, unable to move, unable to breathe. The next day, she made a decision. She would find out what was behind that door, or who. And somewhere, deep within the walls of Hogwarts, the whispering began again. Maren waited until midnight. The castle was asleep, or pretending to be. The corridors were hushed except for the slow tick of the clock in the astronomy tower and the faint moan of wind pushing against old glass. She'd memorized the prefect's patrol routes and the rhythm of the suits of armor that sometimes came alive when students wandered too far. Her heart thudded like a spell misfired as she slipped out of the Ravenclaw Tower and down toward the 5th floor. The passage that led to the old Charms classroom was darker than the rest. The torches burned low here, as if the light itself was reluctant to stay. The plaque on the wall, under repair, had dulled with age. The brass was green and flaking. No one had taught there in decades. Marin raised her wand. Lumos. The glow shivered across the wood, revealing scratches near the bottom of the door. Faint lines like claw marks, or someone dragging a knife in a hurry. She knelt to look closer, and saw something glinting between the cracks. Ink, black as tar, seeping slowly out as if the door were bleeding. She whispered, Alohomora. The lock gave a soft click, then stopped halfway. The door opened an inch and no more. From within came the faintest rustle, paper brushing against stone, or maybe fabric shifting. Marin! She froze. The voice wasn't from inside. It came from behind her. She spun around, empty corridor. Shadows stretched long across the floor, and the torches flickered as if a draft had passed. When she turned back, the door was slightly wider. Her instinct screamed to run, but something stronger held her there. Curiosity, or maybe the same strange pull she'd felt before, like invisible threads drawing her forward. She pushed the door open. The classroom was small, filled with dust and the ghostly smell of chalk. Desks stood in crooked rows, some toppled, some broken. A blackboard covered one wall, the writing on it long since faded into gray smears. But the strangest thing was the temperature. The air felt colder than outside, colder than any charm should allow. She stepped inside. At first, she thought the room was empty. Then she saw it, a shape slumped in the far corner. Not a body, but a portrait. Its frame lay shattered, the canvas torn. Only part of the painted figure remained. A boy's hand, pale, reaching out of the darkness of the painting as if trying to escape. Marin's stomach twisted. She had seen that hand before, in an old sketch on the dormitory wall. Corvin's. Corvin, she whispered. The air moved. The whispering began again, this time all around her, voices overlapping like wind through broken glass. She lifted her wand higher, but the light dimmed, shrinking back toward her fingers. Then something wrote itself on the blackboard in front of her. Lines of chalk forming one by one, fast and frantic. It's not the door. It's the room. It remembers everything that's lost. She backed away, heart hammering. Who's there? The chalk fell silent. Then, beneath the message, new words formed, slower this time, trembling. Marin, it hurts. The letters smeared as though invisible hands were dragging across them. The voice that followed wasn't whispering anymore. It came from inside the walls, from every stone around her, deep and heavy, like the castle itself was speaking. Don't open what you can't close. Her wan light flared. Something moved behind her, a flash of movement, too quick to see clearly, a shadow darker than all the others. She spun, but the doorway was gone. The wall was solid stone. Panic surged through her. She ran to where the door had been, hitting the stone with her fists. Let me out! A long, scraping sound answered her, like wood dragged against stone. The blackboard cracked down the middle. The torn portrait began to twitch, the painted hand flexing, fingers curling slowly into a fist. Marin! She stumbled backward. The air around her pulsed, heavy and cold, and the floor began to shift under her feet, as though the room itself was breathing again. The desks trembled. A low hum filled the air, deep enough to make her ribs ache. Then, with a sudden snap, the stone behind her gave way. The door reappeared, half open. She didn't think, she ran. The moment she crossed the threshold, everything fell silent. The torches outside burned steady again. The corridor was empty. The classroom behind her was dark, still, and quiet, as if nothing had ever happened. She stood there for a long moment, trembling, staring at the closed door. Then she saw it. A new message scratched faintly into the wood at eye level. You left the door open. She turned and ran all the way back to the Ravenclaw Tower. That night, she didn't sleep. The shadows in her room seemed longer, stretching across her bed. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that painted hand, reaching out, curling, moving. By morning, the whispers had started again. But this time, they weren't coming from the door. They were coming from inside her dormitory wall. Marin didn't tell anyone about what happened that night. Not about the voice or the portrait, or the words written in chalk. By morning, she convinced herself it had all been a trick of exhaustion, a hallucination from lack of sleep. But the whispers made sure she couldn't believe that for long. They began softly, almost kindly. Little murmurs from behind her bedpost, from inside the stone wall that faced the corridor. Sometimes they said her name, sometimes they hummed. Sometimes she couldn't tell if it was speech or wind. She cast Silencio on the wall the first night, but it didn't help. The whispers just moved, circling the edges of the charm like water around a stone. By the third night, she was desperate enough to go to the library. She searched for anything, old castle records, ghost studies, cursed architecture, but every book she found ended the same way. Hogwarts had been built with too much magic to ever truly map. Corridors shifted, staircases wandered, and walls remembered more than they should. That phrase stayed with her. Walls remembered. When she returned to the dormitory that evening, she saw something she hadn't before. A thin crack had appeared on the stone beside her bed. It ran downward like a scar, and from it came a faint, cold draft, though the rest of the room was perfectly warm. She leaned closer, her breath fogging the surface. Then she heard it again, her name, faint but unmistakable. Marin. Her friends were still downstairs in the common room. She was alone. She reached out, fingertips brushing the crack. The whisper came again, louder this time, shaped like a sigh. Please. Her heart pounded. Who are you? She whispered. For a moment, nothing. Then, very softly, Corvin. She froze. The name echoed in her skull like a spell misfired. You're lying, she said. The wall pulsed beneath her palm. Help me, the voice pleaded. I'm still here. Behind. The stone under her hand began to warm, then throb, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. She snatched her hand back. The crack had widened slightly, and for an instant, she thought she saw movement inside. The next morning, she told herself she'd imagined it again. But when she looked at the wall in daylight, she saw lines carved into the stone that hadn't been there before. Not cracks, writing. Find the mirror. North Tower. Her pulse quickened. The North Tower was sealed off, an abandoned section of the castle where no students were allowed. It was rumored to house relics too unstable to be kept elsewhere. She remembered the whispers in the corridor before. Don't open what you can't close. She should have stopped there. But curiosity burned hotter than fear. After dinner, she slipped away. The corridors were busier than usual with prefect patrols, so she moved quietly, hiding behind old suits of armor and beneath the staircases that shifted when no one looked. Her wand light was dim, just enough to see her feet. The North Tower was colder than any place she'd been in Hogwarts. The air there felt thin, like breathing through fog. Dust clung to the windows, and old portraits hung crooked. Faces turned away as though unwilling to watch. At the top of the final staircase stood a heavy oak door bound with iron bands. No sign, no warning, only silence. The handle was covered in frost. Marin hesitated, then whispered, Alohomora. The lock clicked, and the door opened with a sound like a sigh. The room beyond was long and narrow, lined with broken furniture and stacks of forgotten books. At the far end stood a tall, cracked mirror covered in a heavy black cloth. The moment she stepped inside, her wand light dimmed again, the shadows deepening until the mirror was barely visible. She approached slowly. The whispers returned, louder now, layered, dozens of voices whispering over each other, indistinct but pleading. Find me. It hurts. Look. Her hand trembled as she reached for the cloth. Marin, a voice said close right behind her. She turned sharply, wand raised. No one there. Her heart raced. She turned back to the mirror and pulled the cloth away. The surface was shattered but not broken. The cracks formed a web across the glass, and within them she saw not her reflection, but corridors. Endless stone corridors, lit by flickering torches, stretching into darkness. And in one of them a figure. It was a boy. His face pale, his eyes black as ink. He stared at her through the glass. Corvin, she whispered. He lifted his hand, pressing it against the inside of the mirror. The glass rippled like water. Marin took a step back, breath shaking. Then the whispers stopped. The mirror went still. The cracks in the glass began to glow faintly, pulsing like veins filled with light. On the surface, words began to form, carved by invisible fingers. He's not the only one inside. The glow vanished. The glass darkened until she could see only her own reflection again, and behind her, a shadow that hadn't been there before. She spun, wand raised. The room was empty, but when she turned back, her reflection didn't move. It was still staring at her. And then it smiled. For a long time, Maren couldn't move. Her reflection, no, the thing that wore her reflection, stood perfectly still, its lips curved into a smile that didn't belong to her. The grin was faint, crooked, too deliberate. Her wand trembled in her grip. "Finite incantatum," she whispered, voice cracking. Nothing. The mirror didn't shimmer, didn't hum with magic. The reflection just stared, unblinking, the same small smile frozen on its face. Then, slowly, it raised a hand, her hand, and tapped the inside of the glass once. The sound was wrong. It didn't echo like glass. It thudded, heavy and wet, like tapping on thick ice. She backed away, her shoes scraping across the stone floor. The reflection's smile widened. Then its lips moved, but no sound came. Maren spun and ran. The air in the corridor outside the North Tower felt sharp and thin, biting against her skin. She didn't stop until she reached the moving staircases, clutching the banister as the castle shifted beneath her. Her lungs burned, her thoughts tangled. She wanted to go straight to Professor Flitwick, to tell him everything. But what would she say? That a mirror had smiled at her? That her reflection had stayed behind when she moved? By the time she reached the Ravenclaw Tower, dawn was creeping into the windows. The castle seemed quieter than usual. Even the portraits slept deeply, faces turned to the wall. When she entered her dormitory, the first thing she saw was the mirror above her desk. She froze. Her reflection was already looking at her. It didn't smile. It didn't move. It just watched. Maren threw a cloth over it and climbed into bed, pulling the curtains shut tight around her. But even behind the fabric, she could feel it, the weight of eyes that weren't hers. She didn't sleep that night. The next day in Charms class, Professor Flitwick was interrupted by a knock on the door. A prefect leaned in and whispered something into his ear. His expression shifted, a flicker of surprise, then concern. When class ended, he called out, "Miss Vale, a word, please." Her stomach dropped. He led her into the corridor, lowering his voice. "Maren, the caretaker says your name appeared on the restricted corridor roster last night." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I just got lost," she said quickly. Flitwick's eyes narrowed slightly. "The North Tower has been sealed since 1913. You don't just get lost up there." She looked down, gripping her wand so tightly her knuckles ached. "I'm sorry, Professor." He sighed. "Stay out of the closed sections, Miss Vale. Hogwarts is unpredictable in its old age. Some rooms should never be disturbed." She nodded, murmured an apology, and hurried away before he could ask more. That evening, she returned to her dormitory early. Her roommates were still downstairs. She hesitated at the door, her pulse fluttering. The mirror on her desk was covered, still and quiet. She stepped closer, staring at the shape beneath the cloth. She should have left it. But something inside her wanted to know. Needed to know. She pulled the cloth away. Her reflection blinked at the same time she did. Relief swept through her, until she noticed the background. Behind her reflected self, there was no dormitory. No bed, no window. Only a corridor, dark stone, torchlight flickering, the corridor outside the North Tower. Maren's breath caught. She stepped back. The reflection stayed close to the glass, eyes wide, mouth opening as though it were about to scream. Then the sound came, not from the mirror, but from the wall behind her. A long, dragging scrape like fingernails across stone. She turned. The crack beside her bed had widened again. From it leaked the same inky darkness she'd seen in the door before. The whisper returned, closer this time. "Not me," it said. "It's using me." Maren stumbled backward, her wand shaking. "What's using you?" The whispering grew frantic. "It's hungry. It." The crack exploded outward, sending dust and shards of stone into the air. The mirror on her desk shattered at the same moment. The lights flickered and went out. When she could see again, the mirror was gone. Not broken, not cracked, just gone. Only an empty frame remained. And from inside the wall, faint and cold, came laughter. Not cruel laughter, not human either. A sound like someone breathing and choking at the same time. Marin backed toward the door, eyes wide, until she reached the hallway. She turned to run, but stopped. Down the dormitory corridor, every mirror on the walls, polished silver, enchanted glass, and even the small ones the girls used for makeup, all shimmered at once. Every reflection turned its head toward her, and every one of them smiled. Marin didn't scream. Her throat locked, her breath catching somewhere deep in her chest as every mirror along the corridor shimmered with that same impossible motion. Dozens of versions of her, twisted echoes behind glass, all turning their heads toward her at once. Some smiled faintly, some stared with hollow eyes. One tilted its head as if curious. Another raised a hand and pressed its palm against the inside of the glass, the faintest fog blooming under its skin. The mirrors rippled as though alive, their surfaces breathing in and out. Marin stumbled backward, bumping into the cold stone wall. The glass nearest to her cracked with a soft plink, like a heartbeat splitting open. The reflection inside leaned forward, closer, until its face nearly touched the inner surface. She whispered, "Finite," but the reflection's lips moved first. "Too late," it said. The torches lining the dormitory corridor flickered out all at once. The world shrank to the pale light of her wand trembling in her hand. She turned and ran. Her footsteps echoed through the Ravenclaw common room, over the spiral staircase, through corridors that felt wrong, stretched unfamiliar, as if the castle were shifting under her panic. She didn't stop until she burst into an empty classroom near the library. She slammed the door shut and pressed her back against it, chest heaving. Her wand light flickered off the dust-coated desks. The silence felt too deep. Then she heard it, a faint, muffled whisper, not outside but inside the room. She turned slowly. Against the far wall hung a cracked mirror, forgotten beneath cobwebs. Her reflection stood there, breathing. She stepped closer, unwilling, as though pulled by invisible strings. The reflection didn't mirror her movement exactly. It lagged behind, as if struggling to remember what to do. Its eyes were darker than they should have been. Marin lifted her wand. "Who are you?" The reflection smiled faintly. "You let it out," it whispered. Her stomach dropped. "What did I let out?" "Not what." "Who?" The reflection's head tilted. The movement wasn't human, too sharp, too deliberate. He was the first. Corvin. But there were others before him. "You woke the door. You broke the seal." "I didn't mean to." The reflection's smile widened. "The castle remembers everything it swallows. And now it's hungry again." Before Marin could react, the reflection raised its wand. The movement was mirrored perfectly, but she hadn't raised hers. Her reflection whispered, "Lumos." The light in the mirror flared, blindingly bright. Marin shielded her eyes. When she looked again, her reflection had vanished. The mirror's surface was rippling like black water. A sound echoed from within, footsteps, faint at first, then louder. Someone walking through the corridors inside the mirror. She could see movement beneath the surface, shapes, shadows, the hint of a hand reaching upward. "Marin," a voice said, distorted through the glass. "You have to close it, before it finds another way out." It was Corvin's voice. The air around her grew heavy, the light dimming as if the castle itself was holding its breath. "How?" she whispered. "You need to find the other mirror," the voice said. "The one that shows what you can't see." "The one in the North Tower?" No, the voice grew fainter, echoing as though moving away. "The one beneath. The one buried." The glass cracked, and the reflection dissolved into smoke. Marin stumbled backward as the surface of the mirror caved inward with a sound like breaking bone. The shards fell to the floor, but instead of scattering, they slid across the stone, forming symbols. Runes she didn't recognize, glowing faintly blue before fading. A chill crept through her feet. The temperature plummeted. The torches in the corridor outside flared and went dark again. Something was coming. She turned toward the window and froze. Her reflection was there again, not in glass, but in the faint shimmer of the window pane. It smiled, slow and deliberate, and mouthed words she couldn't hear. Then a thin crack appeared in the glass, right over the reflection's heart. It spread upward, branching like veins. A voice whispered from everywhere at once. "The mirrors breathe because we do." The window shattered. Marin ducked as shards of glass rained down, cutting her arms, her face. When she looked up, the night beyond was no longer the familiar view of the Black Lake. The world outside the broken window was shifting, a reflection of Hogwarts, upside down, twisted, burning faintly with blue fire. And standing on the other side of the glassless frame was Corvin Ashcroft. But his eyes were hollow, and his smile wasn't his own. He lifted a hand, reaching through the air where the window should have been. Frost spread across the stones beneath his touch. Marin stumbled backward, tripping over fallen desks, wand shaking in her hand. "Stay away from me." He tilted his head. "You can't run from a reflection," he said softly. "You're part of it now." And then he stepped through. The air cracked like ice. The world seemed to fold, as if the mirror between realities had finally broken. Marin's scream echoed down the empty corridors, swallowed whole by the castle's shifting heart. Far above, in the North Tower, the cracked mirror stirred. Its surface rippled once, twice, and then went still, reflecting nothing but darkness. The next morning, no one remembered Marin. Her bed in the Ravenclaw dormitory was neatly made, her trunk sealed, her nameplate gone. Even her closest friends couldn't recall her face, only that there should have been someone sitting beside them in charms, someone who laughed quietly, someone who once drew maps of the stars on her parchment margins. But the memory slipped away like mist. Only one thing remained. In the corridor outside the Ravenclaw common room, a long streak of frost stretched across the wall, from the window down to the floor. Professors dismissed it as a draft from the mountains, but the frost pattern wasn't random. It was shaped like fingers. Beneath the castle, in the labyrinth of forgotten chambers below the dungeons, something stirred awake. Corvin Ashcroft walked through the tunnels in silence. His footsteps made no sound. He no longer cast a shadow, but his reflection followed him along the damp stone, faint, flickering in puddles. He was searching. The mirror beneath wasn't an ordinary mirror. It had no frame, no silver surface, and no reflection in the usual sense. It was alive. It had been built centuries ago, a failed experiment by an alchemist who sought to trap nightmares and study their shape. He had succeeded, but the mirror refused to stay bound. Over time, it drank from the castle's fear, growing deep roots through stone and darkness until it found a resting place. The forgotten chamber beneath the Black Lake. The only way to reach it was through a staircase that appeared only when the castle dreamt, when the corridors themselves shifted in the hours before dawn. Corvin had learned that secret the night he vanished. Now he followed the same path again, though his eyes were blank and his breath cold. He wasn't alive in the ordinary sense. The mirror had taken half of him, and now it wanted the rest. Above, in the library, another student stirred, a Hufflepuff named Alara Finch. She had found Marin's abandoned notebook between the shelves of Magical Theory, Volume 3. The first few pages were ordinary notes. But toward the end, the writing changed, frantic scrawls in ink so dark it almost burned the page. "The mirrors are veins. Hogwarts bleeds through them." Alara frowned. "What does that even mean?" she whispered. She closed the book, and the candle beside her flickered. For an instant, her reflection in the library window didn't follow. Her stomach dropped. She turned her head sharply, but the reflection was already back, moving in perfect sync. Still, she could have sworn she saw it blink half a second after she did. She shoved the notebook into her bag and ran. By evening, rumors were spreading again. Students spoke of cold drafts in the hallways, of hearing their own names whispered in empty corridors. One first-year swore she saw her reflection smile before she did. In the headmaster's office, Professor McGonagall listened as a trembling prefect described the events. "It's the same as before," he said. "The same presence." McGonagall's lips pressed into a thin line. "The Ashcroft incident," she murmured. "I thought we sealed that section years ago." She rose, turning toward the old, cracked mirror leaning against the wall, one of the few relics left from Dumbledore's era. Its surface was dull like dried blood. "I warned them not to move it," she whispered. Down in the tunnels, Corvin stopped. He could feel the mirrors pulse through the stone. The air shimmered with frost. Then faintly he heard a voice. "Marin," it said, distant, distorted, like an echo through water. For a moment, something human flickered in his hollow eyes. He turned toward the sound. The tunnel split ahead, one path descending deeper into blackness, the other curving toward a faint light. He followed the light. It led him to a vast chamber, the air damp, the ceiling glistening with hanging roots. In the center was a smooth surface stretching across the floor like liquid glass. The mirror beneath. It rippled as he approached, whispering in 1,000 voices, laughter, screams, words he almost recognized. He reached out, his fingers hovering over the surface. A hand shot out, pale and cold, grabbing his wrist. He froze. From beneath the mirror, Maren stared up at him, her face distorted by the rippling glass. Her eyes were wide, filled with terror and recognition. "Corvin," she gasped, voice muffled through the surface. "Don't, it's not." Her words drowned under a rising whisper from the mirror. The surface began to pulse, spreading waves of darkness through the chamber. Shadows crawled up the walls, twisting like roots. The mirror was opening. Corvin struggled to pull away, but Maren's grip tightened. "You have to seal it," she shouted. "It feeds on us, on reflections, on memory." He looked into her eyes. For the first time since his return, he felt something real, guilt, pain, love. "I tried," he whispered. Then the mirror surged upward, swallowing them both in a rush of liquid glass. Above, every mirror in Hogwarts cracked at once. And in the library, Alara's reflection smiled, not her smile, but someone else's. She dropped the notebook as frost bloomed beneath her feet. The castle shuddered. Far below, in the chamber under the Black Lake, 2 voices screamed in unison. One human, one hollow, as the mirror beneath began to breathe again. The morning after the mirrors cracked, Hogwarts awoke under a thin veil of frost. It wasn't winter yet, but every window was rimmed with ice that didn't melt under sunlight. The professors blamed a magical malfunction in the castle's old enchantments, though none dared to explain why the frost spelled names. Names that no one remembered writing. Corvin Ashcroft, Maren Vale, and at the very bottom of one window pane in the Great Hall, freshly formed, trembling faintly, was a third Alara Finch. Alara didn't see it. She was in the library again, clutching Maren's notebook so tightly the edges cut into her palms. The ink on the last page had shifted overnight, new words crawling across the parchment like veins. "It remembers us. It collects the ones who look too long." She swallowed, eyes darting around. Every reflective surface in the room, from polished tables to the glass of a clock, seemed to shimmer faintly, as if waiting for her gaze. She wrapped the notebook in her scarf and ran to the one person who might know something. Professor Sinistra, who had once studied Hogwarts' ancient enchantments. But when she reached the astronomy tower, the door was open and frost had claimed the walls. Sinistra's telescope was shattered, its lenses glittering on the floor like frozen tears. And on the blackboard, drawn in the professor's precise handwriting, was a rune that pulsed faintly blue, the same one Maren had seen form from the mirror shards. It wasn't a rune of summoning. It was a seal. Alara took a shaky breath and whispered, "You tried to stop it." The air stirred. Behind her, the cracked mirror by the staircase flickered to life. Not her reflection, Sinistra's. The professor's image appeared, lips pale, eyes hollow. "Alara," it whispered. Alara turned, every instinct screaming to run. "Professor." "The castle is bleeding," the reflection said. "You mustn't trust what you see. The mirror is awake again. It feeds through us, through thought, through memory." Alara's voice trembled. "What do I do?" Sinistra's reflection pressed a hand against the glass. "Find the lost names before it does. The ones it erased." The mirror's surface darkened. Faces appeared behind Sinistra, dozens of them, distorted, half-submerged. "Maren. Corvin." Others Alara didn't know. "They're trapped," she breathed. The reflection nodded. "The mirror can't be destroyed. But the names, if you speak them aloud, if you remember them, you can anchor them back." The glass began to ripple violently. Cracks spidered across the surface. "Professor!" Sinistra's reflection screamed as the mirror burst inward, showering Alara with shards. When she opened her eyes, the mirror was gone. Nothing left but frost crawling along the floor, spelling one new word in jagged letters. "Run." She didn't hesitate. Alara tore through the corridors, her breath clouding in the air. The castle was darker than usual, torches dim, shadows moving where no one walked. Every few seconds, she thought she saw her reflection in the windows glance at her with a heartbeat's delay. By the time she reached the Great Hall, it was nearly empty. Only Professor McGonagall stood at the far end, her expression unreadable, eyes fixed on the enchanted ceiling, where storm clouds churned unnaturally fast. "Miss Finch," she said without turning. "You've seen them too." Alara froze. "You know about the mirrors?" "I know enough." McGonagall's voice was steady but low. "This castle was built on layers of magic. Some foundations were never meant to be disturbed." She looked at Alara then, gaze sharp. "It's feeding again, isn't it?" Alara nodded. "It took them Marin, Corvin, maybe Professor Sinistra." McGonagall's jaw tightened. "Then it's time we went below." Alara blinked. "Below?" "The mirror beneath," the headmistress said quietly. "It's awake again. And if we don't seal it, Hogwarts will forget all of us." The doors of the great hall groaned open behind them. A gust of icy wind swept through, extinguishing every candle. For a heartbeat, the world went black. Then whispers. They weren't coming from the hall. They were coming from the walls themselves. Alara clutched the notebook to her chest as faint voices whispered through the frost spreading over the stones. Dozens of names, overlapping, fading. Corvin. Marin. Sinistra. Alara. Her blood ran cold. McGonagall raised her wand, eyes glinting. "It's learning faster this time," she said. "Stay close to me. And whatever happens, do not look at your reflection." The castle groaned, deep and ancient, as if something massive was turning in its sleep. From far below, deep under the great hall, came a sound like cracking glass and a single, echoing breath. Alara whispered, "It's awake." McGonagall's eyes hardened. "No," she said. "It's hungry." And together, they descended into the darkness beneath Hogwarts, where even the torches dared not burn. The stairway to the dungeons had changed. It no longer wound downward in familiar spirals, but stretched deep and crooked, each turned darker than the last. The stones were slick with condensation, and frost veins crawled across the walls like a living map, leading them towards something breathing below. Alara followed close behind McGonagall, clutching her wand and the tattered notebook. The older witch's silhouette was steady, her back straight, her wand raised, but the air around them vibrated with quiet murmurs. Words without mouths. "Alara," McGonagall said quietly, "if it speaks to you in your own voice, don't answer. That's how it learns your name." Alara nodded, her pulse hammering. They descended for what felt like hours. The stairway grew colder, steeper. Shadows pressed close, moving against the walls like restless memories. At one landing, Alara's light caught a figure standing just beyond the edge of sight. A boy in Ravenclaw robes. His head tilted slightly, eyes wide and empty. "Corvin," Alara whispered. The boy smiled faintly, and his reflection, flickering on the frost-covered wall, turned its head the opposite way. McGonagall gripped her wand tighter. "Keep walking," she ordered. They did. But the boy followed silently, footsteps echoing behind them in uneven rhythm. The stairs ended in a wide corridor Alara didn't recognize, older than the rest of Hogwarts, built of thick black stone etched with faint runes that pulsed dimly blue. In the center stood an ancient door, half submerged in frost, carved with the same sigil she'd seen in Sinistra's tower. McGonagall traced the rune with her wand tip. "The mirror beneath," she murmured. "It shouldn't exist. Albus thought it was destroyed when the foundations were sealed." "It's not destroyed," Alara whispered. "It's growing." As if hearing her, the frost along the door flared bright and then dimmed. A low hum shuddered through the air. The castle groaned, deep and sorrowful, as if something inside was waking up, stretching through the bones of stone. McGonagall began to chant, her voice calm, controlled. The sigil resisted her spell, glowing hotter, brighter, until cracks formed along its edges. Then a whisper, low and close, hissed in Alara's ear. "Say my name." She spun, but no one was there. The corridor behind them was empty. Corvin's shadow had vanished. Only the echoes remained. "Professor?" she asked, voice shaking. McGonagall didn't answer. Her lips moved faster, the spell growing louder, forceful, until suddenly her reflection appeared on the door's icy surface. It blinked out of sync, eyes gleaming unnaturally. Alara felt her stomach drop. "Stop," she cried. "It's copying you." But the older witch didn't seem to hear. Her reflection smiled wider, breaking from her movements, and whispered something Alara couldn't hear. The runes exploded in a flash of blue light. McGonagall was thrown backward, crashing against the wall. Alara screamed, rushing to her side, But the headmistress was already standing again, too quickly, too smoothly. Her eyes had turned faintly silver. "Elara," McGonagall said softly. "It's all right. The door's open now." Elara's wand trembled. "Professor." McGonagall tilted her head, the same motion Corvin had made. "You'll see. You'll understand why it remembers." The door creaked open. Beyond it lay a vast circular chamber, impossibly large, like the inside of a heart. The air shimmered with a cold blue light that pulsed in rhythm, echoing through the stone. Elara stepped forward, unable to stop herself. The floor was smooth as glass, reflecting her face in endless duplicates. In the center stood a black pool, not water but liquid mirror, rippling with faint whispers. It was beautiful, in the way a nightmare sometimes is. Elara looked down, and her reflection didn't look back. Instead, it smiled and whispered, "You're late." Her reflection moved before she did, reaching up through the mirror. The surface broke like a frozen lake. Cold fingers brushed her cheek. McGonagall, or whatever wore her face now, stood beside her, smiling faintly. "It's choosing," she said. "Choosing what?" Elara whispered. "Who gets to stay?" The surface of the pool rippled violently. Faces appeared, Marin, Corvin, Sinistra, all mouthing the same word. "Remember." Elara stumbled back, clutching her wand. The reflections began to crawl from the pool, glass cracking beneath their weight, eyes empty, skin pale and smooth as silver. One by one, they stepped into the world, and with every one that emerged, another mirror somewhere in Hogwarts shattered. Elara raised her wand. "Finite incantatem." The word echoed, but nothing stopped. The chamber's heartbeat grew louder. The reflections screamed, their voices 1,000 overlapping echoes, not in pain but in joy. They were free. McGonagall turned to her, expression soft. "You can't fight them, Elara. They are what's left when we forget." Elara shook her head. "Then I'll remember." She opened Marin's notebook and read every name scrawled in the margins. Dozens of students erased by the mirror, one by one. With each name spoken aloud, the reflections flickered, trembling. Corvin Ashcroft. Marin Vale. Aisling Rowe. Tobias Flint. The walls screamed. The light inside the chamber faltered, flickering between blue and white. The mirror's surface shuddered, as if resisting. McGonagall staggered back, clutching her head, her silver eyes dimming. "Stop! You'll unmake it. That's the point," Elara shouted. She read faster, her voice raw, until the last line. A name she hadn't noticed before, hidden under the ink stains. Elara Finch. Her hand froze. The moment she said it aloud, her reflection smiled. And then the world shattered like glass. When Elara opened her eyes, everything was wrong. The air shimmered like light seen through water. Hogwarts stood before her, but not the Hogwarts she knew. The castle's towers leaned at impossible angles, its stones breathing faintly as though alive. The sky above was a flat, endless gray, and every window reflected her face. A reflection world. Her voice echoed when she whispered, "Where am I?" The answer came not from the air, but from the surface beneath her feet, smooth glass stretching infinitely outward, rippling with faint whispers. "You spoke your name," the voices said. "Now you belong where memory keeps its ghosts." Elara clutched her wand. Her heartbeat felt too loud, her breath too shallow. She turned slowly, searching for something real, anything that wasn't a warped echo of herself. Then she saw it, movement in the distance. A figure walking across the mirrored ground, its robes trailing like shadows. "Professor," she called. But when the figure lifted its head, it wasn't McGonagall. It was her. A perfect reflection, same face, same wand, same trembling hands, but its eyes glowed faintly blue. "You shouldn't have said your name," it said. Its voice was calm, detached, like someone reciting a memory. "Now you've divided." Elara stepped back. "What are you?" "I'm what you left behind." The reflection smiled faintly. "The side that forgot." As it spoke, the ground around them rippled, showing fragments of the real Hogwarts above. McGonagall's body lying motionless in the chamber, frost spreading from the mirror beneath. The students in the great hall frozen mid-breath, their reflections flickering in and out of existence. "You're destroying everything," Elara said, voice shaking. The reflection tilted its head. "No, I'm replacing it. The mirror remembers what they cannot." Every forgotten name, every lost soul. It's not death. It's remembrance. Elara clenched her jaw. That's not remembrance. That's erasure. The reflection's smile faded. Then stop me. The mirrored Hogwarts around them trembled, and suddenly they were inside the reflection of the Great Hall. The enchanted ceiling above showed not clouds but faces. Hundreds of them, pressed against invisible glass, whispering through the light. Elara's reflection raised its wand. Let's see which of us the castle chooses to keep. The duel began. The first spell exploded through the hall, shattering mirrored tables into shards that hung in the air like floating glass. Elara ducked, rolling behind a fractured column, casting Protego just in time to block a blast of pale blue energy that burned like frostfire. Her reflection moved unnaturally fast, each motion echoing a split second before Elara could make it. It was fighting with her instincts, reading them, anticipating every move. Elara closed her eyes for a heartbeat, whispering to herself, "Don't fight her reflection. Fight the memory behind it." When she opened them again, she saw it. Faint threads of light connecting her reflection to the mirrored ground. The mirror was feeding it, sustaining it. Elara struck the ground with her wand. Confringo! The mirrored surface cracked, blue light spilling upward in waves. The reflection staggered, its movements faltering. Elara pressed forward. "You're not me," she shouted. "You're everything I refused to forget." Her reflection screamed, a sound that split into dozens of voices. Faces rippled across its skin, Corvin, Marin, Sinistra, all pleading, all fading. Elara raised her wand one last time. Finite Memoriam. The spell erupted in white fire. The reflection convulsed, shattering into thousands of fragments that dissolved into mist. For a moment, silence. Then the mirror beneath her feet cracked. Through the fracture, Elara could see the real world. McGonagall stirring weakly, frost beginning to melt around the chamber. It was working. The mirror was collapsing. But something held her back, a pull like invisible chains wrapping around her ankles. The mirror didn't want to let go. She fell to her knees, clawing at the smooth surface as the world above drifted farther away. Her reflection's voice, faint, almost gentle now, whispered in her ear. "If you leave, you'll forget. The names, the faces, all of us." Tears burned in Elara's eyes. "Then I'll carry you another way." She took Marin's notebook from her cloak, the one that somehow still existed here, and pressed it against the mirror's crack. The ink began to glow, names bleeding through the pages in bright white light. She whispered every name she could remember. The mirror screamed. The world shook violently, the mirrored sky fracturing above her, shards of gray light falling like rain. And then, with one final breath, Elara pushed herself upward, through the breaking surface, through ice, through memory, into the world of the living. She hit cold stone and gasped for air. McGonagall was beside her, dazed but alive, the chamber trembling around them. The mirror beneath was splitting apart, the pool now solidifying into dull stone. "Elara," McGonagall rasped. "You did it." Elara looked down. Her reflection in the cracked stone smiled back. A real smile this time, soft, grateful, and then faded. The frost withdrew. The whispers stopped. Hogwarts exhaled. But when McGonagall helped Elara to her feet, she frowned faintly. "Miss Finch," she said quietly, "what was your given name again?" Elara blinked. For a heartbeat, she couldn't remember. The chamber fell silent. And somewhere deep within the stone, under the seal of the broken mirror, a faint whisper echoed. Her own voice, calling softly from the other side. "Don't forget me." For weeks, Hogwarts pretended to be normal again. The frost melted. The windows cleared. The students laughed in the courtyards, throwing snowballs that disappeared into harmless sparks of light. Classes resumed. Essays were assigned. The castle breathed as if nothing had ever happened. But deep inside the walls, behind the stone, under the floors, inside the pipes and mirrors and echoes, something whispered still. Elara heard it first at night. It wasn't loud, more like a memory brushing against her ear. A faint voice repeating her name, not pleading this time, but reminding. "Elara Finch. Elara Finch," as if trying to anchor her name before it faded again. She would sit up in bed, heart pounding, scanning the Ravenclaw dormitory. Everything looked normal. Her reflection in the mirror above the dresser even smiled sleepily back at her. But sometimes, when she blinked, her reflection was still awake. McGonagall noticed the change too. She'd resumed her routines, morning patrols, classes, paperwork, but she avoided her own office mirror entirely. The one cracked by the mirror beneath had never quite repaired. When she walked by, she could swear she heard footsteps behind her, just one beat out of sync. The castle had been sealed again. The chamber buried. And yet, late at night, the portraits whispered of sounds rising from below. The clinking of glass, faint breathing, a hum that felt alive. Something hadn't ended. One evening, Alara went to the library to return Marin's notebook. She had copied the names into a new book, her own handwriting, her own words. The old one, scorched at the edges, still pulsed faintly with residual magic. She placed it back on the shelf where she'd found it. But as she turned to leave, she noticed something. Every book on the shelf was turned slightly toward her, just enough to reflect her in their glossy covers. A dozen tiny Alaras staring back. The candle beside her flickered, and one reflection blinked. She froze. The reflection in the spine of advanced spell theory was smiling. Only not her smile. The corner of its mouth was wrong, the eyes too still. "Not again," she whispered. She drew her wand, light trembling at the tip. "Hominum revelio." The room stayed empty. But the whisper came again, now from the shelves themselves. "You remembered us." Alara backed away slowly. "You're supposed to be gone." "Gone?" The voices sounded like they were smiling. "We were never gone. We are what Hogwarts keeps. Every whisper in every wall. Every shadow that moves when no one does. You brought us back when you spoke our names. I saved you," she said, voice cracking. "You kept us." The shelves trembled. Books slid out, falling open across the floor, pages turning rapidly. Dozens of names appeared, written in handwriting she didn't recognize. New names. Students who were still alive. Alara's breath caught. No, that's not. "We remember for the castle," the whispers said. "It forgets. We collect." The lights went out. Alara's wand flared instinctively, and in that moment, she saw her reflection standing among the shelves. Not the twisted doppelganger from before, but something quieter, sadder. Her own face, eyes wide with regret. "Alara," it said softly, "you shouldn't have left me there." Alara shook her head. "You're not real." The reflection stepped closer, its voice trembling. "If I'm not real, why do I remember what you've already forgotten?" "What?" It smiled faintly. "Corvin. Marin. Sinistra. You don't remember their faces anymore, do you?" Alara's stomach twisted. She tried to summon their images. Corvin's shy grin, Marin's freckles, Sinistra's sharp, kind eyes, but the details were slipping, blurred at the edges like half-erased ink. "No," she whispered. Her reflection reached out through the glass of a fallen picture frame. "Every time the mirror sleeps, it takes a little more of you with it. You think you escaped, but you're still part of it. You're the last echo it left behind." The air in the library shifted, colder now. The frost was returning, thin veins stretching across the floorboards, crawling toward her feet. Alara raised her wand, desperate. "You don't belong here." Her reflection tilted its head. "Neither do you." The room went dark. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang, a hollow metallic sound that didn't belong to Hogwarts towers. The books trembled. The mirrors lining the walls rippled faintly, as if something was breathing through them again. And when Alara looked down at her hands, she saw her fingertips glimmer faintly, like glass catching light. She stared in horror as her reflection whispered from every surface around her. "You saved us, now you're one of us." The frost surged upward, swallowing her voice. Far above, in the headmistress's office, McGonagall looked into her cracked mirror and saw Alara standing behind her. Only this Alara's eyes were pale silver. And she was smiling,